So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. 3 years ago, Pamela Sartorius and I founded BHS Partnering Worldwide, a mutual advertising and marketing organization of top independent residential real estate firms around the world. BHS Partnering Worldwide is currently comprised of 60 partners in 87 communities in 26 countries, including key locations in this country. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with our global partner, Executive Director of Art Properties Shanghai, Dima Lorenz. Born in Hong Kong, raised in Germany, Dima has lived in China for over 20 years. I first met Dima at a conference in Vienna a few years ago, and ever since then, Dima has been a great friend and a partner of Brown-Harris Stevens. Good morning, Dima.
Hello, Hall, and thank you very much for the opportunity of having me today.
Of course, of course. So I have a series of questions to ask Dima. Dima, now that China has lifted its stay-at-home orders, can you tell us how your agents are getting back to work? Has any sense of normality resumed?
It's a very good question. Normality, I think, yeah, we're still not there yet. What we had over the last, I would say, 3-4 weeks is a continuous and gradual reopening of the markets, and that ranges pretty much from all destinations within China. Obviously, Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, the larger locations opening up and reopening first. But even the epicenter of the virus, or the post-epicenter of the virus in Wuhan, has now started reopening. That's all very positive and encouraging. So there's good and bad news in all of this. But on the positive side, we're seeing certainly a lot of smaller businesses and also some medium and even larger enterprises returning to a more normal work perspective. We're seeing social life returning, bars, restaurants, cafes that are all operating almost as normal. And I will come to the as normal bit in a second on what is deemed the new normal. But we're seeing just a large number of positive signs. So parks, zoos, recreational spaces, gym, that are all now operating under almost standard conditions. We've got mobility returning between the larger destinations in China. And then also, since about the last 2 weeks, we've got actually even domestic tourism returning. So that's been a very encouraging sign. Now, don't get me wrong, we're unfortunately not done with COVID-19. We're unfortunately still seeing a number of cases in China. We've got about 50 per week for the entire country. Those are the official statistics. Obviously, that is a far cry from what Europe and the US is currently suffering. But a large number of these new cases here are seem to be predominantly imported, so being brought back with returnees returning from the West and from the States. So China has put a number of regulations to keep those particularly returnees still at bay. Now, while it is positive that there is a return of the economy and the reopening of businesses, got to bear in mind that disposable income is down, and it's pretty much the first time down since they started measuring it in 2003. So that will have an effect on just overall spending. I mean, cash is in short demand at present after having gone through very aggressive measures for almost an entire quarter. So even though the bars and restaurants and shops are open, it's not necessarily as if big spending is going on. So we have got the situation that the market is returning to a certain normalcy, but there are still measures that are in place in order to regulate everything. So for and foremost, and this is particular for our business, a really quite hindering obstacle. We deal a lot with corporate relocation work that goes into China, and we currently have a complete arrival ban on anybody that's not a Chinese national. So even if you are an assignee on an assignment in Shanghai and you have a work permit, you're currently not allowed to enter. Only Chinese nationals are allowed to arrive in China. So obviously that part has been very disruptive for our business. Social distancing is still in place, and there is a a mandatory mask, hygiene mask requirement as soon as you're outside of the house. So when you look at that from an agent's perspective, that obviously brings a lot of obstacles with you when you're conducting your day-to-day work. And we had pretty much for 2 months, we had very little activity from a real estate perspective. There was very little going on. But since the market has started reopening and we've got more access to properties, our agents have been busy again. Now, they've been busy on the rental side. Rental rates have dropped fairly quickly due to the current situation. They have not dropped massively, but they have dropped enough for assignees to be, or for tenants to be interesting to look for better deals. So we had a large number of tenants reaching out, and corporate tenants reaching out and asking us whether we could find better opportunities for them. So that's keeping us busy. On the sales side, there's also been an outreach from a number of investors, both domestic as well as some international investors, who have been trying to disperse of their portfolio in China and have been trying to get rid of some of their assets. So that has been keeping us busy, but the way we are conducting that business is still very different as what we are used to from before. So luckily we don't actually have open house viewings in China. It's not a concept that has really taken on. Viewings, whether it's for rental as well as for purchase, are very much conducted on a one-on-one basis with the seller or the landlord being present, or a landlord representative. And now this is all done under the pretext of wearing masks during the viewing. We had even some compounds or some developments that didn't actually allow our agents in. So essentially only the buyer or the tenant is allowed in the property together with the seller, and our agent has to wait downstairs at the hall in order to and just bring the buyer up to the doorstep. So it's those kind of particular restrictions that we have to deal with really on a day-to-day basis, and that is really certainly affecting the life of our agents on the ground. But I think another thing that's been another bit of an obstacle was that, same as you have in any other real estate market of the world, much of our business is conducted through very good relationships. And I think that's probably what our agents are currently struggling with the most. It is very hard to really foster relationships if you have to conduct all business via video chat, as we're doing right now, or with a mask on, or with 2 meter distance. So the quick coffee in between viewings, the beer to socialize afterwards, that all falls away, and that's certainly a hindrance. So, as in summary, I mean, we definitely on a positive momentum. There is a very bright light and increasingly bigger light at the end of the tunnel, but there's still a number of hurdles that we have to go through.
So Dima, since opening up, have there been reported more cases than before or not?
Yeah, we had. I think it's been very well documented in the press on both sides that we had a couple of ups and downs in this whole reporting situation over the last months. I mean, there were a number of I would like to say irregularities that are not that easily explained. I think by now China has come to the point where they are really quite truthful about new cases that are coming in, particularly as they can pinpoint that a large number of these cases are actually not necessarily done by local transmission, but are coming in with returning Chinese nationals, a lot of them Chinese students that have been studying abroad and that are now trying to get home to their families.
Interesting. Dima, I know that you're very familiar with how we sell real estate and the structure of our business in this country. Can you talk to our agents about the structure of your agents in China? Are they commission-based? How does that work?
Yeah, it's I would say, unfortunately, a very different system over here. And you got to remember, we're relatively new to the real estate game in China. The market has been largely dominated by the socialist communist system for a very large time, and there only were major reforms in the 1990s, and that's essentially when our real estate market, our commercial real estate market and residential market came into existence. So we only have roughly 30 years of this, which is very different to obviously the US. There are no real national-wide or country-wide agent licensing requirements. There's no MLS in any of the markets. So all of that, there's a lot of obstacles that come with that. But if you look at it from the perspective of a brokerage, with that lack of regulation and particular agent licensing requirements, the brokerage itself, the company takes on a much larger responsibility in the relationship. So for most of the agencies in the market, all of the agents are largely salaried employees, and that do certainly receive a certain amount of commission on top of their salaries. But it's a very different ratio compared to what you have in the US. So usually a good agent would make anything between 25 or 40% of their total remuneration would be commission based. The rest of it is base salary. Now, typically, an agent would be able to collect between 15 and up to 30% of the total commission made by the brokerage. So again, complete flip side to the commission splits as you have in the US. And on top of that, you also have to bear in mind that our commissions are unfortunately much lower. So we're talking about 1 or 2% on the sales side and about 1 month rental on a rental basis. So it's already a smaller amount and then a smaller commission amount. So again, that changes a little bit the relationship as you would have that in other markets. It's more of almost a traditional consulting business, if you like, with employees that are very strongly engaged in trying to create more value, but that are not entirely dependent upon that commission, which in times of crisis makes it even more difficult, because obviously you have a salary team behind you that you need to make sure is being looked after.
Yeah, interesting. So different. Dima, as of a few weeks ago, you and your wife and children have been in Hong Kong. Are you still there? Can you give us a glimpse of what's current situation is in Hong Kong?
We relocated to Hong Kong a few years ago for a number of reasons. I still go to China. I used to still go to China every second week to be with the team. I haven't been back in 8 weeks, which is really the first of me. This is probably the longest I have not stepped foot into mainland China in 20 years. A very strange circumstance. But I think for Hong Kong, what is interesting, we have a very direct comparison between what's happening now and obviously the SARS epidemic in 2003. And I was already in China at that time. And that was obviously a far more controlled epidemic just in southern China and in Hong Kong. But it had at that point a really major impact on the local real estate market. And you got to see it under the context that at that point, nobody had seen a virus that was as aggressive and as fast as SARS. And there was really a little bit of the sense of overall doom that this is the absolute end, to the effect that real estate prices took a massive dive in 2003 for a very short period of time. And when I say short period of time, it was less than 6 months that the prices were really down quite a lot. And we know a number of investors that have gone very big during that time and doubled down on investments and have made an absolute fortune since that period. We have not seen that same tumble now. The real estate market has certainly softened in Hong Kong, and it has declined, but nowhere close to that dip that it took back in 2003. So I still see that as an encouraging sign overall. Rental has decreased by roughly 10% over the last 12 months. But bear in mind that we had in Hong Kong the particular circumstance that prior to this horrific outbreak, we had 6 months of government protests that already crippled a lot of the local economy, particularly when it came to tourism. So we had a little bit of a double whammy when it comes to horrific circumstances. I mean, very few companies can plan for this. Very few companies have something like this in a contingency plan. So it is a very difficult situation for Hong Kong. And while, in my opinion, the government has done they were very cautious with a number of measures. They were one of the first ones to stop to close the schools, which are now closed for their 10th week, which very much to the joy of all parents who have now to homeschool. So it's been a very long time with that, but I think these measures did make an impact. Hopefully there's something positive that came from that.
Good. Dima, over the years, we've in New York especially, and I know on the West Coast, seen quite a few Chinese buyers. What are the regulations today on Chinese nationals purchasing properties abroad?
Well, there's still the regulations in China for buying property abroad are they're actually very limited, in the sense that there is no explicit regulation that says you cannot buy in any particular market. There's only one major constraint, that is the amount of capital you can bring outside of the country per year, and that still stands at this continuous $50,000 per person per year. One of the reasons why off-plan property development, off-plan property sales is so popular in the China market is that it gives buyers the opportunity to get money out of the country over an extended time period, and use either their own quota or use the quota of their friends, their colleagues, their cousins, and the entire extended family, so everybody can bring $50,000 out of the country. You obviously, there is always the question of how you bring that money back to the other side, because no seller really wants to receive transfer from 15 different people of China. Even just starting from a compliance point of view, that is an absolute nightmare. So this is really the main restriction that China has implemented and has gotten very strict on, or increasingly strict on over the years, in order to stop the outward flow of capital.
Okay. Dima, can you talk to us culturally about home ownership in China and Hong Kong? And do most people, especially mainland China, do they rent? Do they own?
It's actually that in itself, it's a huge topic, and actually quite an unusual one. China has got one of the highest home ownerships in the world. We're currently at slightly above 90% of the total population, the mature population, obviously, that owns their own home. Which is significantly higher than most of the Western world. Much of that reason is still very much not so much a strictly a cultural perspective, but more a leftover from the political system, where back in the 1970s, 1980s, there was an allocation of living space according to your work unit. So we're talking really very obviously the hot phase of the socialist system. In the 1990s, that changed, and a lot of that, the right to abode in these residences was actually converted into home ownership. And therefore, we have got such a large amount of home ownership today. Like, even of the current amount of home ownership, about a good 40% are still a residual ownership from this previous socialist period or socialist system. So you've got this very high home ownership across the country. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are active in the real estate market and continuously trade on their property, but it's more of a family property that's being owned and is being kept in that generation. Now, the interesting part is that of that 90%, 80% are owned outright. So it's a huge amount of assets that are kept within the Chinese population in terms of real estate value. Now, the other interesting part is that, and this is where we come to the cultural aspect, home ownership continues to be highly encouraged and is actually very high among millennials and job starters. And taking Shanghai as an example, it's not so much really a sort of a want by the buyer, by the millennials themselves, but it's more of an overall family requirement. And this is where the cultural aspect comes in. If you really want to start a family life, if you want to move up even in the social ladder, owning a property is an absolute must. I mean, there is a saying in Shanghai that if you don't have a property, you don't get married. That seems to be the standard point on this. Now, obviously, the question, given our very expensive purchase prices, how these millennials can actually afford the buying of a first property, and much of that again comes down to the family. Parents are very strongly supporting the purchase of that property, and don't forget, these are still the current millennials are still the outcome of the one-child policy. So you've got 4 grandparents all looking after this one grandson or granddaughter who are now stepping onto the property ladder. So they're strongly supporting that. And they're also supporting that because in Chinese society, obviously, there is still very much a understanding that the parents will move in at some point with the family. So while it may seem very gracious that the parents are extending some capital to help the youngster get on the property ladder, there's an alternative motive to make sure that there is a place for them later on in the retirement age.
Wonderful. What about traditional mortgages? I mean, can buyers, go to a bank and get a mortgage, or is it all sort of private financing amongst family?
No, well, there is a lot of private financing. Okay, let me take a step back. I mean, mortgages are readily available. So if you do obviously need to have a job requirement, a stable job, and your salary needs to be roughly twice that of the interest payment plus capital repayment. Now, where the regulations come in is that China is very strict on how much they allow their banks to lend money to individuals. And for a first property, and again, there's some variation between different markets in China, but as a sort of general rule of thumb, for the first property, you have to put down, as a buyer, you have to put down 30% in cash. For your second property, somewhere between 50 and 70% down in cash. And a third property, you usually don't get any financing at all. Again, there's some variation in different markets, but these mortgages are readily available, but the amount of how much you can leverage is strongly regulated by the state. And that is simply done to keep the market, to keep inflation in place and to keep the prices in place. Now, bear in mind, China is known as, or Chinese consumers are known as super savers. There is a very high saving rates across China. I think it's a staggering 45% of the GDP rate compared to in the Western world. I think it's only below 20%. So there's a lot of cash being saved up, and that actually obviously allows for these first home purchases as well to put down the first 30%.
Dima, what about foreign buyers? Can they buy in China? Can a U.S. citizen come to China and buy a home?
I wish they could freely come, and that was actually, funny enough, that was our original business concept when we first started in 2005. We were posing ourselves to be the primary vehicle for any foreign buyers, foreign investors that were wanting to buy into the booming China market. The market was open to foreign buyers from roughly 1990s to 2006. So 1 year after we started the business, they put a stop to that. And currently foreigners can only buy for self-usage one property, and only if they have been a local tax resident for a minimum period of 1 year. And mortgages or banks will only give you a mortgage when you actually have been paying salary in China for 2 years. So it is still possible. And we occasionally still have foreign buyers, but the large amount of foreign interaction that we have are with foreign sellers. So there is a surprisingly large number of investors that have gone into the market in this relatively short 16-year period and have heavily invested in the China market. And we're working with a lot of them to either manage their portfolio in China or occasionally also to disinvest from it, and are managing their sale even though they're not living in China on the ground.
Dima, during this very difficult time, certainly at Brown Harris in New York, we spend a great deal of time staying in touch with our agents, holding webinars like this, education, reaching out, personal support. During your difficult time, have you found anything that works very well in trying to keep a positive morale
Yeah.
amongst your agents when there were no sales?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very, very stressful period for all of us, and keeping up morale has been probably one of the biggest challenges. People are worried, people are afraid, and we as companies obviously play a big responsibility in making sure that at least during the work time there's some sort of positive engagement. It's been, we tried a number of things, and similar obviously to you, as much video as you can, particularly for people working from home. I think that helped a lot. We at the beginning we were just on the phone, and then we started adding the video, and suddenly it certainly increased the bonding within the team. We also started doing a lot more regular morning stand-ups, so very short meetings, 10-15 minutes in larger group, where we literally just open up the microphone and got people to shout out topics for the day and things that were concerning, and then splitting up. So trying to recreate a little bit of the water, what is it called? The water dispenser atmosphere where possible. But a couple of sort of awards that we did. So whether it was the best pet award or the best what am I thankful for award. We had one of our colleagues suggesting we could do the best decorated hygiene mask award, but then we reconsidered, because masks are in even now are still in strong demand in China. So unfortunately we didn't have the magic instrument there, but I think it really all comes down to communication. I've never spent as much time on the phone and on video chat in the last 3 months as I've done in the last 5 years combined. I mean, it's been absolutely insane, but it's at least a way to keep the team together, and while not always motivated and encouraged, at least keep the connection going.
Dima, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I really look forward to seeing you in person very soon. So
I
take care.
really hope so. Let's hope the travel bans lift and we can all travel again very soon. But yeah, the only thing I can say as a final word, this too shall pass. And we're seeing on our side, we're seeing improvements, and I really just hope that these improvements and the positive momentum is gonna come to the US and to Europe very soon. So thank you very much for your time, Holland, for the opportunity to speak to you guys. And let me know if there's anything I can help with.
I hope so too, Dima. And I know you and I were planning on seeing each other in Dubai at the meeting this fall, but I have a feeling that's going to be called off. We'll see.
Yeah.
Take care.
It's
Talk to you,
going to
my
be a
friend.
tough one. Anyway, well, thank you very much for your time. Speak soon.
Thank you.